Doc put me in Akron City Hospital, and I was in there for, I think, a week. And I remember this, that I was so sick and so shot that I wasn't even eating at the end of this week. When I left, I hadn't even started to eat yet, so figure this one out. We knew nothing about vitamins in those days. But Doc had these men come in to see me. Every day these fellows would come in that were in the Oxford group there, and they would talk to me, the rummies. There were 18 of them came to see me. I know that because they wrote their names on a sheet, and I still have that slip at home. It's one of my relics. And they told me the stories of their life and what had happened to them. They're all older men than I was, 10, 15, 20 years older than me, all of them were. And all of them had really been around and been through the ringer. They told me what had happened and as far as their drinking was concerned, and they all told me they had the answer to my problem. But none of them would tell me what this answer was. The last day I was in this hospital, I can still remember. This is why I know I wasn't eating, because Paul Stanley, he's dead and gone now. Some of you folks probably knew Paul. He came in at breakfast time, and he stayed all day. He ate my breakfast for me. He ate my lunch for me. I did get the dessert. And at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Doc came in, Doc Smith, and he sat on the foot of my bed, a very unprofessional posture. But he did, and he sat there looking at me a couple of minutes, and he says, young fella, he always had a name for everyone. My name to him was always young fella, because I was a young one then. I was only about 35 at the time I come in, and that was young in those days. It isn't now. There's a lot of people come in much younger. He says, young fella, he says, what do you think of all this by now? I says, well, I think this is wonderful. All these fellas coming in to see me, they're telling me all of the stories of their lives and all this sort of thing, and I don't know them from a bale of hay. It's wonderful, I says, but I said, they all tell me one thing. They tell me that they have the answer to my problem, but none of them gives me the answer. What is it? What do I have to do? What's the gimmick? See, when I went into that hospital, I didn't know what was going to be. I didn't know what this treatment was going to be that I was supposed to get. This was a medical doctor, and I was expecting that some medical performance was going to come into being here, and I was going to be fixed. But no, I didn't have any medicine. They didn't give me anything. I just shook. I didn't even take the whiskey they offered me. So I shook this out. So he says, we're not too sure about you. You're pretty young, and we haven't had any success with these young fellows. They're all screwballs. We've had these young ones. And we don't know for sure that you're ready yet. I says, what's to be ready? I weighed 130 pounds, as I told you before. I had no home, I had no job, I had no clothes, I had no dough, I had no nothing. I had been whipped. I'd been on the bum for a long time. What do you have to do to be ready? Gee, I think we ought to use a little bit of that reverse English on some of these rummies today. But anyway, I had to convince him that I wanted this thing more than anything else. Finally, he must have been convinced, because he says, okay, he says, if you really want this, I'll tell you what the secret of this is. So then I lay back waiting for this big unfoldment here. So he points his big bony finger at me, and he had them, fingers about this long. He was a big, long, gangly fella, and you folks who ever had the privilege of meeting Doc know that. And he could look right through you, look holes through you. He says, young fella, he says, do you believe in God? I thought, holy smokes, I didn't expect anything like that. This is no medicine. And I'm afraid of anything like this because I have been in missions before, and I had been mixed up with these screwballs, and I'd wanted no part of this. But here I am. I'm in this hospital a week, and I'm under obligation to a bunch of religious nuts. This goes through my mind. I'm not saying this. And he's waiting for an answer. So he says, do you or don't you? I says, I guess I do. He says, there's no guessing about it. You do or you don't. This is a soft approach to the spiritual foundation. I like this soft approach people are getting today. So I says, yes, I says, First I asked him, I says, what does that have to do with it? He says, young fellow, that has everything to do with it. Then he asked me this question about, and I had to answer him that I guessed I did. He says, no guessing about it? He says, okay. I says, I do. He says, okay. He says, now we can get someplace. So I thought, well, now we're going to get someplace. He says, now we'll pray. I said, who'll pray? He says, you'll pray. I said, I don't know anything about praying. Now this is real good, you know. This is giving a fellow, it's easing it into you. So he says, I don't suppose you do know anything about praying. He says, but all you'll have to do is repeat after me what I say, and that'll suffice for this time. So he uttered some prayer, and I followed it. I felt like a fool, but it didn't kill me. I survived it. I'm glad I did. And he shook hands with me after. He says, young fellow, you're going to be all right. So that evening he carried me off to a meeting, and that was my beginning in this fellowship.